Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger say that they are withdrawing from the International Criminal Court. The three West African countries accuse the ICC of being a, quote, instrument of neo-colonialist repression, saying that it only targets less privileged countries. They said they will no longer recognize its authority. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are all led by military governments, and those three governments have said that they will set up what they called indigenous mechanisms in its place. Al Jazeera's Nicholas Hack reports from Dakar in Senegal.
Ladies and gentlemen, Africa is shaking the global order tonight. For decades, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, has been accused of being a tool of Western power. A court in The Hague that, in theory, was built to deliver justice, but in practice, has targeted African leaders far more than anyone else. But something historic has just happened. Three countries, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, have stood up, shoulder to shoulder, and made a declaration that is sending shockwaves across Europe, Washington, and every Western capital. Together, under the AES Alliance, they have announced their joint exit from the ICC. Yes, you heard that correctly. Not one country, not two, but three powerful nations in West Africa have decided that enough is enough. They are tearing apart the chains of selective justice. They are telling the world, we will no longer bow to a court that never sees Western crimes, but only sees African resistance. And the timing could not be more explosive. The IMF, already panicking about the growing independence of West African economies, is terrified. ECOWAS, the regional bloc that once pressured these nations, has been left speechless. And the Western media? They don't even know how to frame this, because if they admit what's happening, they expose the fact that the ICC's authority is collapsing right before our eyes. Now, imagine this. The ICC has never indicted a single American president for launching wars in Iraq or Afghanistan. No European leader has faced trial for colonial crimes that killed millions. But African leaders? From Sudan to Kenya, from Ivory Coast to Central African Republic, dozens have been dragged, humiliated, and paraded as examples. But now, three nations have drawn the line in the sand. This isn't just an exit. This is an earthquake, a statement of sovereignty, a warning to the West that Africa is no longer a playground for their so-called justice. And it's no coincidence that this bold move comes from the AES Alliance. These are nations that have already defied France by kicking out French troops. They have already defied ECOWAS by rejecting sanctions. They have already stood shoulder to shoulder with Russia, with China, with each other. And now, they are directly attacking one of the West's strongest instruments of control. Make no mistake, Washington is watching. Brussels is trembling. Paris is panicking. Because if three African nations can walk away from the ICC today, what stops 10 tomorrow? What stops the African Union from declaring its own continental justice system? What stops the global South from uniting against the hypocrisy of a court that pretends to be neutral, but is, in reality, deeply political? This move is nothing short of revolutionary. And here's the most shocking part. The ICC depends on legitimacy. It has no army, no police force of its own. It survives only because countries recognize its authority. And tonight, three nations have withdrawn that recognition, and they're daring others to follow. The question is simple. Is this the beginning of the end for the ICC in Africa? Is this the moment where the global South finally reclaims the power to define justice for itself? And most importantly, what will the West do now that Africa is no longer playing along? Stay with us, because in this deep dive, we will unpack the truth behind this historic exit. We will explain why the AES Alliance is pulling out, why the IMF and ECOWAS are in shock, and what this means not just for Africa, but for the balance of power across the entire globe. Because tonight, history is being rewritten. The world is watching Africa with renewed attention tonight. Three nations, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, have announced a joint and historic decision. They are pulling out of the International Criminal Court, the ICC. This is not just another diplomatic disagreement. This is a direct challenge to the global order, a rejection of what many in Africa see as a biased, neo-colonial institution. A move that has left the IMF unsettled, ECOWAS shocked, and Western capitals in quiet panic. This is more than a legal withdrawal. It is a political earthquake shaking the balance of power in the Sahel, in Africa, and beyond. In this deep dive, we will unpack the history of the ICC, the rise of the AES Alliance, the reasons behind this bold move, the reaction from international powers, and what it means for the future of Africa and the world. The International Criminal Court was created in 2002, headquartered in The Hague, Netherlands. It was designed as a court of last resort, a global institution to prosecute war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity when national courts failed to act. At first glance, it sounded noble. An international system to deliver justice for victims of the worst crimes. But from the very beginning, controversy followed. The ICC has opened more than 30 cases in its history. More than two-thirds of those cases targeted African leaders or African conflicts. Sudan, Kenya, Ivory Coast, the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, one African country after another. Meanwhile, crimes committed by powerful Western nations, wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, interventions in Libya, drone strikes across the Middle East, were almost entirely ignored. The African Union itself has repeatedly accused the ICC of being a tool of Western powers, used selectively to punish weak states while shielding the strong. Former AU Chair Jean Ping once declared, "Every time that we look at where the ICC is acting, it's in Africa." To understand why Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are now leaving the ICC, we must understand their recent history. All three nations are part of the Sahel region, a belt across Africa plagued by insecurity, terrorism, poverty, and heavy foreign intervention. In Mali, a coup in 2020 removed the pro-French government, with a promise to end foreign domination. In Burkina Faso, young Captain Ibrahim Traoré seized power in 2022, declaring a revolutionary path for the nation. In Niger, a coup in 2023 ousted President Mohamed Bazoum, shocking Western allies who had relied on Niger as a key partner. Together, these nations formed the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, in 2023. The alliance was born out of necessity, to defend themselves against ECOWAS sanctions, to coordinate militarily against terrorism, and to reduce dependency on Western powers. The AES quickly became a symbol of resistance. They expelled French troops. They strengthened ties with Russia and Turkey. They called for Pan-African solidarity. And now, they have taken the boldest step yet, a joint withdrawal from the ICC. Why quit the ICC? The decision to leave the ICC is not just about legal arguments. It is about power, legitimacy, and sovereignty. The ICC is seen as disproportionately targeting African leaders. For AES, staying in such an institution risks future prosecutions designed to weaken their governments. Political survival leaders like Traoré in Burkina Faso and Assimi Goïta in Mali are viewed by the West as illegitimate coup leaders. Remaining under ICC jurisdiction opens the door for political indictments. African sovereignty. The AES nations want to send a message. Africa can govern itself. Africa can deliver its own justice. They no longer accept outside interference. Symbolism. Exiting the ICC is a symbolic strike against the West. Just as they expelled foreign troops, just as they rejected ECOWAS sanctions, now they are rejecting a Western-led legal framework. The IMF and ECOWAS have been two of the biggest external forces pressing the AES Alliance. The IMF fears economic independence in the Sahel. These countries are rejecting loan packages that come with political strings. They are leaning toward alternative partners like Russia and China. The withdrawal from the ICC only deepens the perception that AES is leaving the Western orbit. ECOWAS is left isolated. Once powerful in threatening sanctions and military action, its influence has collapsed. The ICC could have been one of its tools to pressure AES leaders. Now that tool is gone. This explains why officials in Washington, Paris, and Brussels are unsettled. The West sees the ICC as an instrument of soft power. Losing three African nations at once undermines that instrument and risks a domino effect across the continent. Make no mistake, the West is worried. The U.S. has never joined the ICC, yet it has supported prosecutions that align with its geopolitical interests. The exit of AES nations exposes this hypocrisy. The European Union, a major funder of the ICC, sees Africa as the institution's core constituency. Losing African states could bankrupt its credibility. France, already humiliated by military expulsions, now sees its legal influence collapsing too. What happens if South Africa, Uganda, or even larger states decide to follow the ES? What if Africa collectively creates its own justice system? The very survival of the ICC is at stake. This raises a critical question. If not the ICC, then what? The African Union has long pushed for the African Court of Justice and Human Rights. This institution, if properly empowered, could serve as a continental alternative. There are even louder calls now for an African-led tribunal to prosecute not just crimes within Africa, but crimes committed against Africa, including colonial atrocities, exploitation of resources, and economic sabotage. If such a system emerges, it would be nothing short of revolutionary. For the first time, justice would not be defined in The Hague, but in Africa itself. The AES move also resonates far beyond Africa. The Global South, from Latin America to Asia, has long criticized the selective use of international law. If Africa successfully challenges the ICC, it could inspire others to reject Western-led institutions and create alternatives. The balance of global power would tilt further away from the West, accelerating the rise of a multipolar world. The joint withdrawal of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso from the ICC marks a turning point. For some, it is a dangerous step that undermines global justice. For others, it is a courageous assertion of sovereignty, a rejection of double standards, and a bold step toward a new African future. What is undeniable is this. The decision has left the IMF unsettled, ECOWAS shaken, and the West in quiet panic. The AES Alliance has already expelled French troops, defied sanctions, and rejected Western dictates. Now, they have taken the fight to the very foundations of international law. The question is no longer whether Africa can challenge the West. The question is, who will follow next? Because tonight, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have redrawn the map of international justice, and the echoes of their decision will be felt for years to come.